The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Minnesota Soccer Podcast, on which we are definitely not going to talk about basketball for large percentages of it. Or the Vikings.
Unless news breaks live on the air.
Which the reason why it's on my mind is because Nic Hallett and I were at the Minnesota United game last night, which we're going to talk about in great length in a little bit. Minnesota United scores their second goal. And as soon as, I looked down at Twitter to, make my tweet that they scored, woohoo, Woj tweets that Town signed his extension. Immediately. And I'm like, too much is happening at the same time.
Overwhelming.
So, anyway, we have the privilege of having a podcast to talk about a Minnesota professional sports franchise that did not embarrass themselves. Ooh. It's in front of national media this weekend. Shout out to the Vikings and the Timberwolves.
It was impressive.
Yeah, Minnesota United went out and got back to winning ways for the first time in 2 months.
Minnesota United's just biding.
Turns out it's good to play at home.
Minnesota United is just biding its time. It needs to build up more of a hope before it does that embarrassing thing that makes all Minnesota fans feel.
That sounds about right.
That normal feeling of shame.
Well, this game had a little bit of that traditional feeling of shame to it, as we had the great first half, we had the total domination, 3-0 lead, and then they do that thing where they give up 2 goals and make it look like they're going to blow this lead again, which, if we think back to the last time they played at home, is exactly what they did against the Seattle Sounders.
It was so similar.
There were elements of it, but they didn't blow it. They finished off the win, and yeah, it was not bad. Nic Hallett, you and I were both there, which was awesome. What were your expectations going into this game? I don't think we talked about that too much, even last night when we were together.
Measured, not anticipating, coming off of incredibly long road trip and coming off some poor results. It's so funny because they're so Jekyll and Hyde, home in a row and splitting onto the road, that you don't even know what to expect, because it's at times you're like, this is a pretty decent MLS side, and then they play on the road and you're like, who let the U14, boys C3 team in? And so, yeah, I came into this game with minimal expectations, and then sure enough, they blow the doors off the Timbers, and hey, it's bizarre, and it goes to the main question I asked Adrian Heath in the postgame, which, as you and I discussed, had a really interesting reaction. How can you not bottle? How can you be like this? How can you play this exceptional in the first half and not have any semblance of that ever when you play on the road? And again, like I said when I asked Heath the question, I said, fair enough, tonight, the second half, you could argue, is complacency. And I get that. That's human nature. That's understandable, although arguably unprofessional. But understandable somewhat nonetheless. But for you not to be able to ever this season recreate that on the road is truly bizarre. And what was funny, and again, Heath's answer was great, because it proves that he's just as befuddled as the rest of us. Because I asked him, I said, I asked that question to him point blank, why you guys played so well in the first half, why can't you do that on the road? And he looked me right in the eye and he's like, if you figure out, let me know.
Yeah, just straight up. If you figure it out, here you go.
And David had a great retort to that. David, what did you say to me after the press conference?
Well, when we were walking out, it's like, so Heath just offered you his job if you figured this out, right? That's how that works. Like,
I think you have to follow up. So seriously, though, I think
like you gotta just like be like, hey, can I just like take one day of practice this week just to try a couple of things, and if we get it right, then I just get your job.
I'll take an assistant role. I don't need to take his job. I'd work for him. He seems like a really cool cat.
What do you guys remember offhand when the last home game was? Because it was a long time
It was
ago.
August 4th, which was 7 weeks ago.
And we talked about after that show, or you guys did, the importance of this road stretch, that this would be kind of make or break for the playoffs. We know how that played out. I think we've also talked about the main factors for why teams struggle on the road. It can go from universally in sports, it seems like, if the fans don't influence the players, as in make it easier for the home team and harder for the away team, there's studies that have been shown that they influence the refs, that home teams tend to get better calls and all that stuff, and it's literally not intentional. It is just human nature.
Yeah.
We talked about how being on the road that long is difficult, being away from home, literally not in your own bed, in a different situation, time changes, flights, all that stuff. What to you, is there anything unique to United you can think of that may make it more difficult? I don't know. I don't know if they're younger than most MLS teams or anything like that. Or what do you think is an overriding factor when it comes to being on the road? I'm trying to get you a job here.
Yeah, well, you're trying to ask me the question that I essentially asked the dude who's running the show and knows the team better than anyone, and he didn't know. So how do you expect me to know? It's not like
it's the first time we've asked this question. Like, this has been the question for the entire season because the road problems are exactly new news. When the team's road record, I quote from the standings, is 1 win, 12 losses, and 2 draws. Not new.
Stunning.
Like, we've asked this question of Heath, of the players, of everybody we can find for months.
Yeah. And I really do struggle to find an answer. I mean, the former in the older renditions of this very podcast, we had a great co-host by the name of Andy Lori, who used to play for the Minnesota franchise. He used to play for this team back in the day,
with a harder probably road schedule, but
yes,
right, yeah,
less of a budget, so even harder road schedule. But Andy, they've struggled on the road through the last 4 years. Or the 3 years and change.
And you said it's kind of universal in soccer anyways, right?
And so the data shows in the MLS that the home road splits are strong. MLS teams across the board do perform better at home and poorly on the road. And Andy's contention as a player for this very franchise, his contention was primarily that it's the travel and that it's, when he was on the team, they flew coach. And they would have they would go cheap, so they wouldn't even go nonstop all the time necessarily. So I don't know that they're not flying. I don't think they're flying private now. They might be flying more first class or what have you, but I don't think they're flying.
Yeah, I feel like Andy Creeder had a story on this earlier.
So it's arduous, but man, you still think okay, I get that. That is hard, but to have it show this great of an effect is surprising.
I read an article about this earlier this week that I'm going to track down the link for so we can get it into the podcast description, about what, obviously on a different scale, what Tottenham Hotspur, with their new stadium but also their new training facility and building with that, are trying to do to influence players' sleep and players' rest, and what that can do to positively influence players' health, players' game readiness, all of the above. And it's one of those things that I mentioned when I read it. It's these are all the things that they're talking about just with travel within the UK and including the European trip. But imagining what the effect something like that has on an MLS schedule is even more drastic in terms of rest time, in terms of home comfort, in terms of time on the plane. Like, there's been plenty written about this in other sports in the United States, with a lot of studying the NBA being done in recent years on the impact of road schedules and how to reduce road trips and road games and the demands of that to take care of player safety. So it's one of those things that, like, the MLS, through virtue of where it's at as a league, through virtue of its finances and all this stuff, just isn't on the same level as this stuff. And it has this effect. Like, just looking at the Western Conference table, there is, of 12 teams in the conference, there is one team that has more away wins than away losses this season. FC Dallas, who lead the conference. 3 more teams have the same number of wins and losses, home and away. Sporting Kansas City, LAFC, and the Seattle Sounders. Every single other team in the Western Conference, playoff teams, non-playoff teams, has a losing record away from home. All of them.
Let me posit this, and it's the same direction you're going in. I think of, like, the Wild's old division where they had to play in Western Canada. You're going into a different time zone. And generally speaking, they weren't, like, really geographic rivals. And now they're... So instead of now going to Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver, now they in division play, St. Louis, Winnipeg's, pretty quick flight, Chicago's a quick flight. Even Dallas would be kind of farther away, but same time zone. And I believe statistically they've improved on the road because they're just not. It's simply mileage and time change. You're just doing that less. And I think the Wolves have one of the worst situations in basketball in terms of where they're positioned and having to go to Portland and Oklahoma City and kind of all these random spots. Is United's division, or is their schedule tilted poorly in terms of, like, I mean, I know they just played Portland and stuff like that. Do they play teams that are farther out than they should be? I know that, like, Chicago's not.
They
in
don't.
Their conference or
What I will say is it's very much like the NBA, where you have to play so many. Well, I think NBA is trying to do divisions now, but you have to play so many of the Western Conference opponents. And if you're in the West, you play the Warriors and you play Houston. So you got to go to the
Warriors is terrible.
You got to go to the ends of the country. And MLS is the same, whereas, like, maybe the NFL has a slight benefit to that because they have 4 teams in a division, so you really can be more specific to your geography. So the Vikings have maybe a nice setup because they only have to go to Chicago, Detroit, Green Bay. Yeah, Minnesota, as a Western Conference MLS team, does have to go all over the place, and that's not going to change.
And pure geography, like, even in the NBA, the conferences aren't balanced how you'd like, but Minnesota has the chance to play your Milwaukees, your Chicagos, your Indianas, your teams that are closer geographically. There are 2 MLS teams within, like, a day's driving distance of the Twin Cities. It's Kansas City and Chicago, and that's it. There are no teams in Wisconsin. There are no teams in Indiana. There are no teams, like, anywhere else close in the Midwest. That just hasn't been where the league's developed yet. It's so coastal.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's something legitimate to this. I mean, hence this discussion and hence the statistics. But I think on some level, it becomes an excuse. It is legitimate, but totally. There's also an excuse. And, like, as David pointed out, the teams that are fine happen to be super talented teams. Yeah,
it's just like Golden State. Golden State travels all the time, but they're way better than everyone, so that's why they win more. Yeah.
So I think there's something there, but, man, you got to, I mean, everyone's putting up with it.
Put it this way. Minnesota United, because since we get to talk about a home game this week, which was on the good side of it, Minnesota United have played 14 games at home this season in the MLS. They have gotten 28 points from those games, so getting 2 points a game from that. One team in MLS at all is getting 2 or more points a game, which is Atlanta United, the best team in the league. If Minnesota United received the same number of points per game on the road as they do at home, instead of 33 points right now, they would have 58 points, lead the West by 5, and have the third most points in MLS.
That's pretty.
If they figure it out, they become immediately a contender.
Do you see technical differences in how they play? Do they play differently? I know you talk about
They do look very lethargic. They do. They look very
Really?
lethargic when they play on the road. Like
They look like a different team.
they do. They really.
And it's
do.
even more staggering when you see a first half like they played on Saturday night, where they are dominant, like totally, absolutely, for 40 of the 45 minutes of the first half, made Portland look like an amateur team. And this is a Portland Timbers team, fourth in the Western Conference, 47 points, entering the game 17 points ahead of Minnesota United, who beat them at their place earlier this season.
I think it's interesting to think how if they sort out the road woes, that eventually the playoffs are more than achievable, as you point out with that stat. So, yeah, I think we should go. I think it's interesting to delve into what happened last night in that first half.
Yeah, like it really did look like Minnesota looked good, but I think the thing that drew my eye and your eye more was just how bad Portland looked.
And I think that's an important thing to bring up because as we discussed amongst you and I and our new friend Jacob Schneider in the press box is that they were shorthanded in a couple different ways, and they were playing. I think you told me the stat was their third game in 8
days.
Nights. So they're in a rough way, and they're Diego Valeri and their best defensive midfielder Chara are sitting on the bench, and specifically they looked horrible in those two positions. Like the turnovers that they were giving away were juvenile and really odd and especially poor. And so as much as United did look exceptional throughout the first half, there are, again, a caveat there that must be brought up.
The moment that sticks in my mind is Liam Ridgewell, one of Portland's defenders, mishit a pass so badly that it looked like he just passed it straight to Maximiano. And then, Maximiano charges down and takes a shot that he probably shouldn't have taken. But it's like, when do you expect to just receive a pass from your opposing defender at the doors of the attacking third? Like, that doesn't happen at this level of soccer, or at least it shouldn't.
Yeah, and it happened 3 other times that were similar to that.
It was just strange. And on the good Minnesota side, Darwin Quintero was in a mood last night.
The mood that I think he's been in since he put on cleats at age 5.
Yeah,
because
holy cow, he was just making dudes look stupid.
I mean, but that's him. I mean, we've seen that.
Yeah,
every time he suits up. I mean, it's the same old guy, and that's what's amazing. Is one of my other fears when he first started doing this, when he first came into the team, was like, man, this guy's really good. Oh, it's going to be a bummer when they start double teaming him or figure him out and he can't do any of this anymore. And that's just not happened. So it shows how legit he is and how it's going to continue. And yeah, he's unreal.
He routinely beats the first 2 guys that come at him, just normally.
Yeah, I would love,
which is crazy.
I would love to know. It doesn't probably exist. But I would love a stat that said how many, just a 5 out of 10 or a 9 out of 11, how many times the first defender he's gone against, how many times he's successfully surpassed them. Because I bet I would venture to guess it would be 77 out of 79. You know what I mean?
Yeah, his conversion rate on the initial contact is just nuts. It's unbelievable. And he did not score last night. 2 assists, both on goals to Romario Ibarra, both well-taken finishes that Darwin did a lot of the work on both of them for. But Darwin had 3 different opportunities that I can think of. 2 really good saves at a close angle by Steve Clark, and a third attempted chip that went off the top corner of the goalpost. That he was just everywhere.
Yes. I think I lost my initial train of thought on what I was going to say about him, but I think his dribbling ability, it's a treat. It's a treat to watch. And I think actually like the story a bit more so last night is about Romario, because we've really at times seen him in bit parts, but these last 2 games for me have really pointed out that he's a real contender for a heavy role in this team, and it's especially impressive to me the last 2 games how he's played as a striker essentially, and that's incredibly valuable considering the problems that Abu Danladi's having injury-wise. The fact that, Angelo Rodriguez does a lot of good things but hasn't exactly been finishing consistently, and it's starting to get trending towards that worrying amount of games played and lack of goals. So, and Romario, like, it's so weird because he does fly under the radar, even in games that he's playing, but this dude, like, he starts for the Ecuadorian national team, and he plays against quality opposition such as Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and he's like one of their main guys. I mean, this dude is pretty legit, and it's cool because it seems like, and again, so much of the way I watch these remaining games is with the eyes towards next year, and it's clear that Romario could be an important piece going into next season.
Well, and the thing that he brings that's different from what your Angelo type or your Christian Ramirez type is his just raw speed comparable to Danladi's. Specifically in this setting, it opens up space for Darwin to work, which Portland did not adjust their scheme to what that combination was doing to them, which is why they got into so much trouble, because they'd have Romario would make a run and he'd have a guy stick to him, which just leaves Darwin with space to move, pick a pass, and take care of his business. That's Minnesota United's attack at its most dangerous. Is Darwin open field, eyes out to find whatever pass he needs to find, because he'll find it.
Exceptionally so.
So, and we must note it was a bummer to see Romario go off immediately after he scored his second goal with a presumed hamstring injury.
Well, and he confirmed
as much. Yeah, he said after the game it was his hammy. So that was a bummer because that was what was working, is they were just hitting the combination of Romario and Darwin over and over and over, get 2 goals out of it. Just Portland had no answer for it.
Yeah, it's especially unfortunate, like I say, because so much of what we're looking toward now is next year, and it's going to be interesting how he utilizes Romario, and like I said, it seems like Romario could be a legitimate, potentially starting striker option. So much happened in this game, given the great start and then the sketchy comeback and the other, Minnesota United drama therein, that one of the questions I wanted to ask Heath was why did Romario start over Angelo in the first place? That's interesting in and of itself, because as we talked about at the game, Angelo had a week of rest. He didn't start the last game either. So to me, that's curious, and I think it's interesting as to what that means. So, heck, even going into next year, your starting striker could be Romario. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but yeah, it's interesting.
It's a new wrinkle, right? It's something else they have to play with, something else Heath has to figure stuff out, because in theory you could have Darwin playing behind both Romario and Angelo, played the double of them up top and make that work somehow. Don't think it's likely, but you get another piece to plug in and to play with and to find what works best, and having that is a great resource.
And as weird as it sounds, honestly, momentum can carry over from the end of a season all the way to the next season, because if you finish this season with a certain shape, last night they were playing the 4-3-3, and Romario's the central guy, Miguel's on one side, Darwin's on the other. You win 4 of your 5 last games, you're going to want to carry that into the next season. And so Romario's injury throws that off. I mean, heck, he scored 2 goals last night. Who knows how he would have played in the second half? Based on that, how do you not start him the next game? So Angelo,
if he's healthy, yeah.
So Angelo possibly sits again. Let's say he continues to play well, pops in 1 goal a game the rest of the way. I mean, that's pretty darn interesting and really shakes things up. So it's who knows what would have been and how that necessarily would have played out.
Yeah, so that was interesting. And while we're contemplating Romario's 2 goals, I believe the first one was set up by a beautiful ball over the top from our new favorite defensive midfielder, Fernando Bob, who was himself turned into a major talking point of this game, but his first half play looking forward was phenomenal.
Yeah, he's great. He's great. He, to me, over these 3 games that he's now played with the team, is cemented as one of the most important players and very much so a key cog going into next season.
Well, and the pairing of him and Maximiano both has seemed to work really, really well since they've come together.
It has. As I wrote for ZoneCoverage.com into the player ratings, Maximiano definitely probably played his best game as a loon, but we've all of a sudden, now that he plays alongside Fernando Bob, it's like, oh yeah, this pairing of the 2 Brazilians looks awesome. But all these performances from Maximiano that make him look better have come since Bob entered the team. So to me, I'm not a full believer in Maximiano's ability until he does it without Bob. Until I see him doing all these different things, having a solid game from start to finish without Fernando in the lineup. So it's hard. It's really hard for me to judge because, again, at times he definitely had a much more positive effect on the game than he normally ever has. But, man, I mean, it just feels so more than coincidence that he's doing it now that Fernando's a starter alongside him.
Oh, absolutely. And it's given the fact that it is working with both of them, there's a chance we don't have the answer to that question before the end of this season. We don't see one without the other for more than like a substitute appearance. And that's going to remain a question, I feel like. I'm not sure if we get that answered. Well, so that I think your point is very fair. I don't know if we're going to find that out.
Yeah, and I'll be fair. Let's put it this way. I guess this is the fairest I can be to Maximiano, is that if we look at how he's played with Bob these last 2 games, he does what the other defensive midfielder should do really well, and that's just break up plays, do the most grungy work that no one really wants to do, and just go in and tackle guys, win really tough 50-50 balls, and then just get rid of it and get it to someone else. And that's the role he has when Bob's there, because Bob can distribute so well that's taken off his shoulders. And all the times, again, I'm kind of giving the devil's advocate to what I said earlier, all the times Maximiano has had these poor performances prior is when he's been in a role where he has to more front the load of distribution for the team as a midfielder. And in this team, in this shape with Bob, he doesn't need to do that. And so maybe that's more fair to Maximiano, is that you were kind of playing him out of position in theory, you'd say to Adrian. And that when you play him alongside this type of midfielder, then he's at his best. And so maybe that's something we have to look to Heath on rather than at Maximiano.
Yeah, and I think both of those points need to be considered when we're looking at this, because it's just like he does look, at this point, does it seem fair to say he looks like the player we hoped he would be in this situation?
More so, definitely, than what I expected. I assumed coming from Brazil and playing in the top division there, which is a very legit top division, obviously, that he would be more all action. He would have more in his arsenal. He'd be able to dribble more. He'd be able to distribute more. He'd be able to have some offensive flair. I mean, you think of the Brazil national team, even defenders on that team are exceptional going forward. So, and that That's Brazil. Like, that's what they're about. And so you just, rightly or wrongly or fairly or unfairly, you anticipate that would be coming from Maximiano. And to me, from what we've seen, that's clearly not what you'll get. And fair enough, you don't need to do that necessarily. So I maybe my point would be that my expectations were maybe too high for him, and that maybe instead of expecting, a 9 out of 10 player, he is just a 7, out of 10, which is serviceable and useful.
Yep, and that's sometimes that's what you need, right? Is you need the guy to do the dirty work. You need the guy to get into the tackle and to clean it up. You need the guy who, as he did again last night, is going to be the guy to go pick up the tactical foul when it needs to be, when the opposing team's trying to break, which is what more than just last night's of his yellow cards have come from. But as that guy, as we've talked about, he is now suspended for next Saturday's game against New York City FC on yellow card accumulation. Fernando Bob is suspended for that game by virtue of his extremely late red card in last night's match. So part of the reason I don't think we see them apart from each other is because we definitely won't see them next week.
Which this also brings up my favorite part of the post-game availability with the team. Usually it's almost always lock, stock, the press conference with Adrian Heath, because he's so interesting and fun and open. But David, I don't remember if you saw this clearly or how close you were to me when I saw this unfold, but we were interviewing Michael Boxall at his locker after the game, and someone, we had asked, the media had asked 2, 3, 4 questions, and someone to ask the 5th question informed him that Bob and Maximiano both were going to be suspended for card accumulation next game, and he said, can I swear on the podcast?
Go ahead in this one instance.
Because someone was like, "Hey, yeah. So how do you feel the midfield is going to look? Because you're going to be without Maximiano and Bob next season because they're suspended." And he went, "Oh fuck, really?"
On the record on TV.
I actually missed that. That's great.
Oh, it was awesome because he didn't hide. He was so genuine because he didn't hide it at all. Because he had been professional answering questions, and they told him that, and he was like, "Oh fuck." It was awesome.
Whoops.
Yeah.
And you said
that's fantastic. Yeah, I didn't have a good angle on Boxy's post game, so I missed that. That's delightful.
Oh, it was awesome.
You wrote in your piece, Bob's. It's so funny that's a last name. I have to register that.
It is weird.
Fernando Bob.
Yeah, I love that name actually. His red card was a result of theatrics from the other side, right?
In my opinion, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's
I don't disagree.
Yeah. So the way I saw it unfold was that Diego Valeri, former MVP of the MLS, gets subbed onto this game for Portland, and they are up against it. They're down 3-1 when he comes on. They've been down heavily this whole game, and their only hope is to really just throw stuff at the wall and try to come back into this game. And getting penalty kicks would be a great way to do that. And so there's this exchange 10 minutes before, or about 15 minutes before Fernando Bob's red card, where there's a ball going back to Bobby Shuttleworth. He goes to pick it up. Michael Boxall is standing between the two of them and knows Valeri's going to try to run back there. So he just kind of holds his ground. And Valeri launches himself into Michael Boxall and flops backwards. Just to me, again, playing years of highly competitive soccer and watching so much, I see things for what they are in an instant. I just know the game, and it was clear what he was trying to do there.
It was the quintessential stereotype of what everyone that doesn't watch soccer thinks soccer is.
Yeah, and I couldn't. But to me, it did kind of slip by the naked eye because the ref didn't could have given him a yellow. A lot of fans didn't get uproar about it. But to me, it was clear what Valeri was trying to do, and the game context. Therefore, it makes perfect sense. Dude, he's just trying anything because the game's a lost cause. And sure enough, 12 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it was later, Fernando Bob, just outside his own box, is trying to win a header, puts his arms out to gain balance and positioning, as almost anyone would do. Who flies into this arm that he's put out and flops backwards. Diego Valeri.
There's no penalty for that, right? Like in hockey, where you can.
No, there is.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can get yellow cards
You
for
can call
simulation.
that. And the thing that intrigued me about it is that referee went to his red card pocket within about 2 seconds. He did not hesitate. There was no VAR. There was no nothing. And it did not look like a very clear cut sending off, to say the least.
Yeah, I didn't watch. I didn't watch the replay like 5, 6, 7 times, and I didn't watch the live act, even like that live speed 5 or so times. I only saw it in that. I saw it live, and then I looked up at the monitor and watched the replay once or twice, and that was my take. I might have a different take if I watched it at full speed, 5 times, because live I could kind of see why the ref thought it was a foul, because Bob did like look around before like extending his arms out. But to me, the look around was, I'm trying to get position, not I'm looking for someone to elbow. So I see that's clear what the ref saw happen, and that's why the red card came out so quickly and came out at all. But to me, it was clear what Valeri was doing, and he earned a dangerous free kick and got a guy sent off for doing it. So his flopping was effective. The thing so many people hate about soccer, that's why they do it. It's at times, unfortunately, a really good game strategy.
Yeah.
Yep, and it got increasingly ridiculous the closer it got to the end of the game on both sides, because Darwin was doing it a little bit too. And it was an exchange that happened in Heath's post-game press conference and Jeff Ruder of The Athletic, who wrote a piece earlier this week about Darwin not getting the respect that other star-level strikers in MLS get from referees. And he had some pretty strong quotes about that, both in Jeff's piece and last night. And he's right. I mean, Valeri gets those calls, and Darwin continues to not get those calls unless he's squirming around on the ground.
That was an interesting point. I haven't watched a comprehensive amount of MLS to fully back Heath's opinion on that. Heath's opinion being that other best players on other teams are getting lots of calls. Although I've watched
specifically strikers, like
I've watched a decent amount of Galaxy games, actually, not by purpose. Definitely kind of has been accidental. Not a huge fan of watching Galaxy games, to be honest. I don't think they're that good. But Zlatan dives all the time and gets all the calls. So that whole Heath's argument that star players are getting star treatment on other teams does seem to hold true. And Darwin,
he called out Giovinco and Almiron too, from Toronto and Atlanta respectively. Like,
which are similar players to Darwin. And so unfortunately, maybe Darwin isn't getting star treatment, and I think that. And what I would corroborate with Heath on is that yes, it does not. Darwin does not get a copious amount of fouls drawn.
Yeah, I'm with that. So to me, it seemed like the referee didn't do a particularly good job of maintaining control of the game, and it may have led up to a snap reaction and just I saw an arm up, he's down, holding his face, off you go. That could have been a train of thought. It could not have been. I think that foul probably merited at least a yellow card, if you're going to call it. Not sure it's a straight red, and that's where I'm at. I have gone back and watched it a few times. It didn't look... It looked like it definitely hit, but it was incidental contact. That's my 2 cents, and I get to talk about that without getting fined by the MLS, where Adrian Heath and the rest of Minnesota United's players do not. Yeah,
fair to him for biting his tongue. You could tell he wanted to get after it a little bit.
Oh, yeah. He's been good about that this year. Couple other thoughts while I'm going around the game. I showed Nick the... speaking of naughty words on the podcast,
I was just going to get to this. I was going to bring this up because it's the second best F-bomb of the night. It's the second best.
It was incredible. So Portland's manager, Gio Savarese, was interviewed at halftime on Portland's TV broadcast. As you do, you get the words of the manager. Heath does it on Fox Sports North. I think their sideline guy is Nat Borchers, former Portland player, U.S. men's national team player. Goes up to Gio, asks him, Gio, what are you gonna tell the guys in the locker room? Like, what are you gonna do to try and turn this around? And Gio Savarese, to his credit, says that they were effing terrible and walks off
On the TV broadcast.
on the TV broadcast.
Yeah.
It's a
head
phenomenal
coach.
clip.
The head coach just drops the F-bomb.
There must be a culture of that in soccer because Heath is pretty out front. Like I remember that was it Salt Lake. The guy unsolicited was brought up the VAR thing.
Yeah.
And this dude is just like,
yeah.
the team is terrible.
I think it might be because so many of like the world's like most famous managers, like the Jose Mourinho's of the world, the Sir Alexes, they all like soccer's so uber popular over there that like anything they say creates massive hysteria in the media all the time, and a lot of times they're not afraid to be bold and like call someone out or do something kind of outlandish, and so maybe that's, you know what I mean. It's head coaches over here seeing that and just kind of mimicking, I guess, in some way.
Yeah, it makes sense. That does kind of make sense. It's just this is what you're supposed to be if you're a soccer manager, so we're gonna be like this. Shout outs to both Michael Boxall and Alvis Powell, two defenders who scored two absolute bangers of goals.
Boxall's goal was pretty sweet.
Boxall's goal was outstanding.
That was wild. I didn't.
And his celebration made it even better because he just totally lost his mind.
You know what else he said in the post game about that? He said his wife, I think it's a recent
Fiance.
Yeah, became his fiance. Sorry. He said that she told him during the week, she's like, "You're gonna score a goal this week," and he's like, "What are you talking about?" Like, he's like, "It made me think that she really doesn't understand football, but then I scored, so maybe she does."
I have the second half of his quote of that in my recap at which you can find at zonecoverage.com because it was fantastic because it's like that is I think Megan Ryan of the Star Tribune asked him if he'd like planned out a celebration. He's like, I mean, who knows when the next time I was going to score is? So like a little bit, but not really. Yeah, no, he just caught a volley, top of the 18-yard box, and just smashed it into the back of the net. Nothing doable about it. And Alvis Powell's goal for Portland, which was their opener, was kind of about the same thing. Just hit a half volley, clean as can be, right in the back of the net.
Yeah, that was actually definitely better than Boxall's because his was much further out. So,
yeah,
they're both stunners.
Two outstanding goals.
Absolutely.
How do you feel about Calvo at left back?
Well, I was just thinking, I was like, United's looked pretty darn good the last two games. Two of their best results, definitely in recent memory, the draw last week and the win last night. And where's Calvo been and all that? Playing left back. I mean, if they don't take their foot off the pedal, that's a 3-0 win, and they're coming off a decent road draw that they arguably could have definitely won. So they could have beat Real Salt Lake and been 2-0 in the last two. And they just generally obviously looked better over those last two games. And where's Calvo been? He's been at left back, which, again, I'm not excited to just go into because we've belabored that point on this podcast. People, if you listen to this podcast, how we feel.
He was asked about it last night, and he's like, "You guys know my preference. My preference is to play center back, but I'll play where the team needs me, and it does let me get forward a little bit more. So that I guess that might be good."
Okay, I missed Calvo.
He's aware of it.
I didn't talk to Calvo, so that's what he said on that.
Yeah, that was the first thing he was asked is, "How'd you feel about playing left back as opposed to center back?"
And that's what he said.
Yeah, he was interesting. I don't think I put that entire quote in my recap, but it was a thing to think about.
I can't believe he still prefers center back. That's wild.
Yeah, he and Heath both were of the opinion that United should have won this game 5 or 6-0. So if if we haven't expressed to you how dominant they were in the first half, was they felt it too.
Yeah, that they should have walked away with that game. I started writing at halftime, and I thought I could just, write that story. I thought it was done. But, yeah, that game obviously shifted dramatically. It shouldn't have. It shouldn't have whatsoever.
So as we start looking ahead at next week, Bob out, Maximiano out. We probably get one maybe final return of the Ibsen Schuler midfield. Your favorite thing in the world, Nic Hallett.
Yes, certainly not. Let me just say credit to, we talk so much obviously about the offensive guys, Darwin. I think it's fair to recognize to Brent and Bobby's contributions last night. Bobby,
for sure.
Bobby did what Bobby does when Minnesota United wins, and that's made two really important saves in the second half that easily could have been goals that he's just stellar in. The timing of some of his plays is so vital. So it's good to see because the team's had a rough run prior to this, and so has he in that respect. He kind of stopped being super Bobby and just kind of went back to regular for a little bit. And there was a bit of some signs of super Bobby being back last night. So that was good. And then
the other thing I saw from Bobby is I loved watching him kill the clock in stoppage time last night. Like, just expertly using every possible second he could. Team's down a man, need to just get through these 6 minutes of stoppage time. And there were, like, every single time, Portland didn't do much with their possession, but it's like, I'm going to let the ball roll to me. I'm going to look down at it. I'm going to look up at you and make you run over here. And then I'm just going to fall real slowly on it. And then we're going to look around. And I'm going to adjust some people. And then, okay, I guess I'll kick it away. And then we'll do it all again. Like, this is what a goalkeeper does to end this game.
He's a smart dude. He's a smart dude, and he's a competitive dude, and he's a sassy dude. Like, he's down to do whatever it takes, and it's something you definitely want in a goalkeeper. Have I ever told you my favorite Bobby Shuttleworth anecdote? I don't think I've ever shared this on the podcast, but
let's hear it.
It's relatively relevant to this, but it jogged my memory. It was at practice up in Blaine, just watching them practice, and the offense is doing some crossing and finishing drill. They're playing it out wide. Guys like Miguel are whipping crosses in, and they're trying to finish one time. Standard soccer procedure, if you will. And Bobby Shuttleworth and Matt Lapson are like swapping out who's defending it, and the offense is looking putrid. They are doing horribly by any measure. Any NFL, NBA fan would have been watching that and been like, oh, these guys are doing bad. Like, never watch soccer in your life. You're like, oh, these guys are struggling. And the offense, they just keep going. It's not going well. And the offense finally scores like 2 in a row. And they celebrate like it was a real game. And they're like, whoa, like yelling and running around. And then Bobby Shuttleworth just yells out like, who cares? You went like 2 of 100. It was hilarious. Oh my gosh. It was like the perfect like sass response to their celebrating. It was awesome.
There's a little bit of me that wants just like a day in the life of Bobby and Matt Lampson just spending a day together. Because like Matt Lampson is the funniest dude on the team. Like, bar none.
I've not chatted with Matt, so I can't.
My first memory of Matt Lampson was when he was starting really early in this season. He was doing a crossword while he was waiting for the media to come talk to him, and he opens his media remarks by asking for help on the crossword puzzle he was stuck on.
Nice.
Like, he messes around, and he's a really, really interesting, fun dude. I enjoy him a lot.
Nice.
So yeah, I think that would be an interesting little thing. So Minnesota United PR, if you're listening, make that happen for me, please and thank you.
This guy just wants to hang out with you guys. Can you accommodate this?
I don't even necessarily want to be there. I just want them to film like YouTube 5 minutes of that.
Yeah. Okay. From like a goalie's perspective, yeah.
Yeah, like I would say, I don't need to be involved. I just want to watch it.
HBO's Hard Knocks, but just the United goalies.
I actually
the United goalkeeping team.
They should do something like that. I feel like that's that kind of press would help soccer. Just like building, kind of.
That's a great point.
Yeah,
if you've seen what Hard Knocks has been able to, the buzz it's able to generate, the eyes balls it's able to
so
generate.
So many people are watching the Browns now, which is so ridiculous.
Exactly. How do they not try to extrapolate on that? I don't understand. How do other sports not jump on that?
No, the NHL did it for a while, and you got this great Bruce Boudreau quote that's still like Giles and the goalie still use. And like the NHL was like, yeah, that's too raw. We don't want that.
I think that's stupid. I think that's dumb.
Don't other teams do that? Like Juventus and stuff, they have their own like. I guess that's.
I watched it.
You've had a documentary on Netflix. I know
it was super. I watched it. It was super watered down.
Yeah, that
was
sucks.
Not what Hard Knocks is.
Hard Knocks is great.
Hard Knocks is legit.
Well,
they show stuff that like
the team
you're like, wow,
yeah.
I can't believe they let them show that.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
And Juventus thing was so. It was just like a PR like.
Ish.
All day.
What were you saying before, Naylor?
Well, like the thing with like any of these guys, any of these leagues is like people want to be able to feel like they know these dudes outside of watching them on TV. Like it's one of the things that I think is interesting to mini basketball, or if it's about Towns, is I think it's really cool that Towns just like streams himself playing Fortnite every now and then, because it's a way to just like connect with people and be like, I'm kind of also just a normal dude like you guys are. And that kind of content, like it's how you get people to relate to your team and like care about the individuals. And I think seeing a lot of like the community work that Jerome Tieson's done this season, it's like that kind of stuff where it's just like, I'm going to go hang out in elementary school and play soccer with you guys and just I'm a dude that plays soccer. That's awesome.
I think the streaming's great, unless you have, I don't know if you guys saw this, but Will Myers of the Padres went on some guy's stream, and it's a Padres player, and he has a pretty big following, and he complained about having to do drills and stuff like that.
Oh, man.
And
fans probably didn't love that.
Yeah, the fans didn't like it. Luckily, his manager was pretty understanding, like, yeah, I get it. I'm not surprised he doesn't want to do that, but he has to do that. But I was like, I guess that's the one downside. But I'm with you, Naylor. I think that the kind of knocking down a wall there a little bit, and it's hard.
Just a different kind of access, right? Like,
it's also hard just to be disingenuous throughout an hour-long stream or however long those are. Like it does. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, Nick. Are they going to beat New York City FC, the third best team in the Eastern Conference, home on Saturday? You
mean New York City FC, who has the best defensive midfielder in MLS? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Where's the game at? Is it here?
Here?
Ooh, they got a fighter's chance
for you, but yeah.
Is David Villa healthy?
Is he willing to play on turf? Since that's been the question for all the big names coming to Minnesota?
Yeah, if David Villa doesn't play, they've got a legit chance. Like, their odds go down remarkably if he plays. I say but they're losing Bob, which has brought a lot of stability to the team. I think they go down. Regardless of Villa plays or not. If they had Bob and Maximiano, which has obviously brought stability, I think they have a very legit chance of winning. But they'll be without Romario too. They'll be really shorthanded.
So I will note that just like Portland, NYCFC will be playing their third game in 8 days because they've got a midweek game this week too. They drew 1-1 with Montreal on Saturday. They play against Chicago at home on Wednesday and then play in Minnesota on Saturday. So they're going to have another one of those long weeks. And the question for them is if they get 3 points against Chicago on Wednesday, I believe they clinch their playoff spot. And that would put them 6 points up on Columbus with not very many games to play. So it's one of those things where not that they'd consider resting guys, but they might do something similar to what Portland did, right? Where Diego Chara and Diego Valeri start the game on the bench. Chara comes in at halftime. Valeri comes in at like 60, 65 minutes. it's one of those things where like they're in a situation where they've got to have their eyes in the playoffs because they're functionally clinched if they won't be clinched already by the time they reach Minnesota.
And they'll be, as you pointed out, overextended for playing so many games. So
yeah,
that does change in terms of prediction. That does change the landscape pretty wildly. So given knowing that, and Minnesota, a lot of those guys, like guys who are going to be inserted into the lineup, Ibsons and other guys, kind of be fighting for their position in the team going into next year. Actually, maybe
I might take Minnesota to win this game.
Yeah, if NYFC clinches, I would give the edge to Minnesota. If they don't
I
clinch,
think I could see that being realistic.
If they don't clinch, it's a little bit more 50-50. But
yeah, for sure.
if David Villa plays, just don't even show up. No, I'm just kidding. But
yeah, he's really good, it turns out.
he's exceptionally good.
All right, Tom, what do we have going on across the site?
We obviously have a lot of breakdown on this. I think we alluded to this earlier on the that Bills game. That was not good for the Minnesota Vikings. Obviously, check out the player ratings and Naylor's recap. We will. It is media day tomorrow for the Wolves.
Media day at the circus tomorrow.
Yeah, I should say, like, we're recording Sunday night, so it's probably, as you listen to this, it might have happened. But, yeah, we will break down from all angles, not just the emotional, psychological, whatever you want to call whatever the hell's happening with the Wolves, but also just kind of some other topics beyond Jimmy Butler, who may or may not be traded by the time you hear this. And then obviously the Towns extension and kind of how this would affect Wiggins and Tibbs if he's still coaching, and all of that will be on the site. That's going to be a big focus going forward. Obviously, check out the Gambling Podcast, where Colt Molesky is actually betting on soccer and losing a lot of money, which is entertaining. And bring the beat in with Sam.
Not
Ekstrom.
Surprised.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, definitely check it out.
And I saw the Wild put a whole bunch of goals past somebody in preseason this week, so they're alive.
Yeah, that was during Ben's wedding, actually. But which he's not. He's mad at the Wild for multiple reasons. One of them is screwing up parking at his wedding. but yeah, apparently that was an Avalanche team that was not playing as many starters. But yeah, kind of an interesting season for the Wild, and Ben and Giles and Heather and all those guys will be back at it. So yeah, definitely check out the site.
When is Zone Coverage's resident Wolves podcast, the Dane Moore Show? When is that?
Yeah, so that
airing next?
That will be right like as immediately as possible after media day. So yeah, we will obviously have writing on the site, but we kind of want to get those reactions out. And last one was with Ricardo and old friend Tim Fakeless. Ricardo, unfortunately, heading back to Italy. He's sick of the Wolves, sick of Tibbs, but and actually, he is right. He's but I mean, in all seriousness, he's an accomplished writer. Naylor knows him pretty well, and
lifelong Juventus fan, writes for Gazzetta dello Sport.
Yeah,
grew up in Turin, followed the team, written about the team, covered several World Cups. Like, in addition to the fact that he came here to write about basketball, amazingly knowledgeable soccer guy. It's been a privilege to talk to him and get to know him for the past year. So shout out to Ricardo, great friend. I will miss him dearly. Yeah, no, he's been great, and we told him we were just gonna have him on the podcast for 4 days, so he misses his flight. but no, we so yeah, he's been a fun addition there. So yeah, a lot of good stuff. Check out the site. Everything's kind of picking up here. I'm assuming. Yep. The Vikings. And if you want Wolves takes from me, the
website's gonna have so much content.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Go ahead.
If you want Wolves takes from me, I appeared on the Land of 10,000 Takes podcast, friends of the program, slightly, with Patrick Fenelon and Maggie Schultz.
Yes.
So that'll be out and about today or tomorrow, and we talked a lot about our slightly different angles on the Jimmy Butler situation. So if you want Wolves side stuff from me, I'll put that up on my timeline at some point, because that was a fun conversation last night.
Yeah, and you'll be covering the Iowa Wolves, right? So the team down your way. So yeah, I think definitely check it out. Things are picking up. I know it's been a little bit of a slow summer with the Twins not being great, but yeah, a lot of
all of a sudden tons of content.
I'm on just like crazy stuff, like the Carlson stuff and the Jimmy Butler stuff, and
the Vikes play already again on Thursday.
Yeah. So And obviously United, I think, kind of, not to compare them to the Twins, that's almost unfair, but like it's kind of similar that, you guys are looking at who could be part of the future. We're looking at who's going to be part of the future for the Twins.
For sure.
All right. So with that said, I think we're about good for the evening. Nick, do you have any final thoughts before we're out?
I don't.
I'm shocked. Truly shocked. So
give me a topic and I'll rip something. But I gotta give me something.
I'm not letting you do that. We've already lost the audience.
Dang it.
Too bad. Get a riff ready for next week. We'll do it then. So for Nic Hallett at Prince Hallett on Twitter, Tom Schreier at TSchreier3 on Twitter, and myself, David Naylor at Prof Cedar on Twitter. This has been the Minnesota Soccer Podcast, part of the Zone Coverage Podcast Network, and we will see you next week.